The Preston Somers Expedition of the capture of Caracas was a series of military actions that took place from late May till the end of July 1595. During the Anglo-Spanish War, an English expedition headed by George Somers and Amyas Preston sailed to the Spanish Main, initially intending to support Sir Walter Raleigh's expedition, which set out at the same time. After failing to meet, the expedition went on their own venture along the coast of the Spanish Province of Venezuela and captured the fort at Guaira before they headed south inland. After making an arduous trek through the mountains, the English were able to outmaneuver the waiting Spanish force and captured the colonial city of Caracas. After the failure of a ransom, they plundered and torched the city and then went to capture Coro before they made a brief excursion to the Spanish West Indies. Despite the challenges they faced, the expedition was a success for the English, who were able to return unmolested with some profit, having set out as only a supporting expedition. Background: England's war with Spain had been going on for nearly 10 years. Spanish colonies, warships and merchants were subject to attacks by English privateers. Many of these were ordered by the Queen Elizabeth I, but a number were also operated as joint stock ventures similar to the English Armada. In 1595, one such expedition was that of Amyas Preston and George Somers with the privateer ships Ascension, Gift and Darling Angel, and a pinnace. The expedition's purpose was to cooperate with Raleigh's work of exploration in the same year at Trinidad and Guiana in the hope of finding El Dorado, as well as to commit to amphibious descents throughout the Spanish Main with them. For this purpose they had a disembarkation force of 300 men. Many of them were professional soldiers of the English army who had been fighting against the Spanish in Holland and in France. Preston made a name for himself during the battle against the Spanish Armada in 1588. Somers first sailed into the public eye when heading towards Spain in command of the Fleet, and in the company of 3 other vessels. He brought home Spanish prizes worth more than £8,000. Having sailed from Plymouth on the 12th of March, they were further accompanied by Captain Moses Willis's Archangel and 2 other vessels out of Southampton, which they met at sea. As a test for training the soldiers, they disembarked and attacked the Portuguese settlement at Porto Santo on Madeira and successfully plundered small villages. Expedition. By the 18th of May, Preston and Somers had reached Dominica, and after refreshing for 6 days on the island, they sailed south to Los Testigos Islands. Here they celebrated a muster ashore on the 28th of May and continued southwest against Margarita Island, which they soon sighted and came ashore on the following day. They explored nearby Coche Island the next day and captured a Spanish caravel and a few pearl fishermen that had come from Puerto Rico, which turned out to be valuable. War.An Guaira. On June 1, the 8 English privateer vessels and the Spanish prize appeared before War off Spanish Venezuela and seized 3 more caravels in the bay. Upon landing, however, they found the residents had been alerted to the presence. The English then decided on a ransom or otherwise threatened to set the town on fire. The ruse succeeded, and a modest amount of foodstuffs were acquired from the Spanish, following which the English departed in peace the following evening after having burned the caravels. The English moved further along the main coast and anchored 1.5 miles east of La Guaira at a beach near Macuto. They landed a small force and moved inland parallel to the sea and sighted the fortress that protected the small town but also protected the main gateway to the city of Santiago de Leon de Caracas further inland. Somers then disembarked the rest of the men on shore and then led the force overland. After probing the defences, the English assaulted the small fortress of La Guaira and with surprise complete occupied it with little resistance. The remains of the garrison then fled and immediately warned other Spanish forces in the area of the English presence. The next day in the afternoon, a patrol of 50 Spanish cavaliers descended out of the mountains from Caracas and saw that the English had occupied the fort. A number of the musketeers under Captain Roberts emerged from the keep, who offered them combat, from which the Spanish then promptly withdrew. The Spanish soon realized the English were going to strike at Caracas itself. The Spanish did everything they could to bow their advance, so they concentrated the strength along the main road, also known as the King's Highway, leading up to Caracas. Preston and Somers knew that getting to Caracas would be a serious challenge since it was much further inland and the defences were strengthened. Now that the element of surprise had been lost, for the English, getting to Caracas was huge a challenge, as it was built on a high plain, at an altitude of between 2,500 and 3,000 feet, 6 miles inland within a valley protected by the mountains of El Ávila, which is located along the central stretch of the Venezuelan coastal range. At night the English slipped out of the fort and knew that by heading up the mountains they would be difficult to see, let alone be engaged. The Spanish, however, did not maintain close watch upon the English movements, and this obviously worked to Preston and Somers' advantage. Without haste they marched a column undetected through the rain during the night. They had help from a lone Indian which they used as a guide and were able to advance up a little-known track high into the mountain and kept well clear of the main road. They marched through the thickly wooded slopes in the dark, some of the time having to cut the way through, and halted at a stream for refreshment and waited for dawn. They walked close around the summit of Pico Negrita, then marched down on through the early morning fog and were within sight of the town by daylight. The English could not believe the luck when at midday of the 8th of June they appeared unexpectedly outside Caracas, completely undetected. They had marched for 6 miles in impossible terrain, and what's more, apart from fatigue, there were no casualties. A part of the city's militia had formed in front of them, but the majority were still gathered along the main road. Preston and Somers then formed 3 groups, the main battle group in the center, and 2 smaller, flanking forces on either side. The English thought the Spanish would attack, but they remained in place and in turn attacked and forced them. The Spanish flee, leaving behind 1 dead soldier and a number of wounded, but the attackers had suffered no casualties. The rest of militia further up guarding the main road were surprised by the unexpected attack and were in complete disorder and too late to do anything. The English soon entered the city with little resistance encountered, since most the non-combatants had fled inland. A lone elderly Spanish rider named Alonso Andrea de Ledesma bravely attempted to check the progress with his lance and shield. He was, however, shot dead. So admired by his courageous effort, Preston ordered that de Ledesma be carried on his shield and received a hero's honor before being buried. The invaders had secured the city by 3 p.m. and the Spanish militia attempted to retake the town but were repelled in poorly coordinated attempts. The English remained in possession of Caracas for 5 days, and the Spanish offered a parley from which the English attempted a ransom of 30,000 ducats. The Spanish offered 2,000, then 3,000, but being so small, Preston and Somers then set about sacking and plundering the place, stripping anything of value. A ransom of 4,000 ducats was offered to spare the remains of the town, but Preston and Somers soon received intelligence from Indians that the Spanish had sent for help and were delaying the negotiations until reinforcements could arrive. Preston and Somers were furious, as the Spanish had gone against their honor of a parley and a consequence. In the morning they burned Caracas and some surrounding settlements to the ground. They then departed the way they came, taking whatever they could away from the Spanish militia, who now had more reinforcements. They entered Caracas soon after the English had left, only to find the vast majority of it in ruins. The English had returned to Guaira by noon on the 14th of June with the booty, exhausted by their arduous trek. The next day Preston and Somers sets the fortress ablaze, as well as demolishing its defences, and were thus prepared to leave Coro. The next morning the English departed from La Guaira and headed west. On the 16th they soon arrived outside Chichiraviche. Somers led in a boat party that captured 3 anchored Spanish vessels and secured some of the booty from them before setting firing them. The town was entered upon with virtually no resistance, though was too small to make a ransom, and the English departed further west again, this time to Santa Ana de Coro. On the 20th of June, having made the way along the coast, the English sighted Coro Bay. Preston led his formation there and ferried all his troops ashore by 11 p.m. The target was the town of Coro, which was established at the south of the Paraguay Peninsula in a coastal plain, flanked by the sandy Magallanes Isthmus. The area was famous for having been colonized by the Germans as sort of a part payment from the Spanish in the 1520s to 40s. The town had a small garrison under command of Governor Juan de Riberos. Somers stayed behind with 50 men to secure the anchorage, but the Spanish were soon aware of his force and hastily marshaled militia to impede them. The English attempted a nighttime assault on the town, but ran into a barricade which the Spaniards had built prior, blocking their advance. The English attacked in number, but the Spaniards defended stoutly, repelled their attack at first, and then tried to advance around the barricade to outflank it, but this too failed and losses were beginning to mount. With more men coming up, however, the English launched another assault and managed to fight the way through, driving the defenders off. There was soon a running fight with the English pursuing the Spaniards, who really only delayed their advance. They reached Coro itself, and after another small fight, the town was gained and secured the following morning with relatively few casualties. The English held the town, but its buildings had stood empty, as the residents along with de Riberos had received ample warning of the advance and fled inland with the valuables. Preston then ordered the town to be sacked, and the English went on the plunder again. Coro was held for about 2 days, and on preparing a ransom, Preston had learned that a rainstorm had struck the English anchorage. The cables of Somers's 50-man pinnace had parted, which was then driven out to sea. Preston therefore ordered Coro thoroughly sacked and torched. All the buildings were destroyed, including the church and chapel. Preston hastened his column back to the coast and to set sail in order to search for Somers. The following evening Somers stood just outside Lake Maracaibo's entrance seeking safety, but with the wind up they both decided to leave, and with wind astern headed towards Hispaniola on the 26th of June. And by June 30th the Preston Somers squadron sighted Hispaniola and next day anchored off Cape Tiburon to search for fresh provisions. When the formation resumed its cruise on the 8th of July, Preston's Ascension and Somers's Gift were the only ones left when the other ships decided to depart for home. 4 days later the remains of the privateer vessels anchored off Jamaica and remained there for a few days before proceeding towards the Caymans. They reached Cape Corrientes off Cuba by the 22nd, and they decided to perform a short blockade off Havana in the attempt to make a few small prizes. Prize were shortcoming, with only 2 small ships captured, and disease began to take its toll. Dysentery raged throughout the vessels, having already killed 80 men, and soon the expedition was to be terminated. Being fortunate that the Spaniards had not caused any damage and not to chance further luck, they headed home to England. Aftermath. Before the English left the Caribbean, they encountered and fell in with Raleigh's ships returning from Guiana, with whom they kept company. They made a visit to Newfoundland in August to stock up on fish before crossing the Atlantic, before they arrived at Milford Haven in Wales on 10 September without further loss and counted the plunder. The expedition in terms of plunder was only moderate, and it just about covered the cost, with little profit having been made. The expedition was only meant to support Raleigh in his quest for El Dorado, and had done far more than it should have done. As an independent expedition, it was highly successful in terms of military results. The capture of Caracas via the mountains was a rare trait, and except for the losses in diseased casualties were fairly light. A 17th-century Spanish historian José de Oviedo y Baños described the feat performed by Preston and Somers. This was a hidden path, rather, and old disused path, used by the native Indians to ascend the mountain. Further down the mountain into the valley of St. Francis, a road so rocky and impassable that it seemed impossible for a human foot to use. Somers and Preston were both knighted by the Queen for their efforts in the expedition, and for further feats in the war with Spain. In 1596, Preston was captain of the Ark Royal with Lord Howard in the Cadiz expedition. Legacy. Somers is remembered today as the founder of the English colony of Bermuda, then known as the Somers Isles Company. Both Preston and Somers reunited in a way to become involved in the foundation of the colony of Virginia, specifically Jamestown. Some sources indicate that the rider who resisted the English in Caracas, Alonso Andrea de Ledesma, may have been the inspiration for Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes, written nearly 10 years later. Bibliography. Andrews, Kenneth. Trade, Plunder and Settlement, Maritime Enterprise and the Genesis of the British Empire, 1480–1630. Cambridge University Press. ISBN 9780521276986. Andrews, Kenneth R. English Privateering Voyages to the West Indies 1588–1595. Kraus, ISBN 9780811504027. Baños, Don José de Oviedo y Historia de la Conquista y Población de la Provincia de Venezuela. University of California Press. ISBN 9780520058514. Bacino, Hugh. Elizabeth's Sea Dogs: How England's Mariners Became the Scourge of the Seas. Conway. ISBN 9781844861743. Bradley, Peter T. British Maritime Enterprise in the New World. For the late 15th to the mid-18th century. Edwin Millen Press Limited. ISBN 9780773478664. Chartron, René. The Spanish Main 1493–1800. Osprey. ISBN 9781846030055. Dean, James C. Tropics Bound, Elizabeth's Sea Dogs on the Spanish Main. The History Press. ISBN 9780752496689. Ferry, Robert J. The Colonial Elite of Early Caracas, Formation and Crisis, 1567–1767. University of California Press. ISBN 9780520063990. Constam, Angus. Elizabethan Sea Dogs 1560–1605. Osprey. ISBN 9781841760155. Marley, David. Historic Cities of the Americas, An Illustrated Encyclopedia, Volume 1. ABC Clio, ISBN 9781576070277. Marley, David. Wars of the Americas, A Chronology of Armed Conflict in the Western Hemisphere. ABC Clio, ISBN 9781598841008. Rain, David F. Sir George Somers, A Man and His Times. University of California, Pompano Publications. ISBN 9780921962106. Woodward, Hobson. A Brave Vessel. The True Tale of the Castaways Who Rescued Jamestown and Inspired Shakespeare's The Tempest. Viking. ISBN 9780143117520. External links: George Somers, Amyas, Preston and the Burning of Caracas by Gavin Shorter. The Bermudan